My name is Mary and I'm the president of Sutherland Wells, and I'm here today to chat with my associate Jon Williams, who is the manager for the operation, about all the various questions that get put in front of us every day. So Jon, I get asked this question all the time. Is there an expiration date for our products?
Usually we say no on most of our products because of all the interior products. They last, basically virtually forever. What the products that are dated would be the exterior because of the added UV and middle-side protection. Those materials tend to drop out or become less effective after about a year. So those products do have a date of about a year of when they're manufactured. Those products are usually manufactured in small batches. So therefore, what you receive is usually pretty recent. But as far as all the other products, if you keep them in a nice airtight container, closed container, they'll last for many years.
Well, that said, I had a gentleman call this morning who had some medium luster tung oil, and he said it was gelled. Was it still good? Could he still use it? And if so, how could he kind of put it back together again so that it would be usable? What would you tell him?
I tell them if it's not too gelled up, they could perhaps thin it with some mineral spirits, some solvent, and of course by doing so you're diluting the material. But even at that, you just kind of start.
You use that for your first or second coat, perhaps.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And you start with less amount of solvent, and then you might have to just keep adding more depending on how how it looks. But obviously there becomes a point where it's too gelled or too solid that.
And you have to call us, and we ship you out some more.
Mary, one question that I receive a lot is before they finish a piece, maybe even this table here, there's cracks in it or checks and stuff like that. They want to know what they can fill it with.
That's a great question.
And they always ask what kind of wood filler, and then they also ask, should I do it before I oil or after? Right.
Those are great questions. Well, what I usually tell people is, first of all, epoxy is a great filler. It's clear, you can go over it with any of our finishes. For instance, like if you're trying to secure knots like these or trying to fill things in, you want the surface to be even, so epoxy works really well with that. And you want to do the epoxy before you oil. So that would be one instance that you could use that material. But if you're really trying to match something, for instance, you've got a divot here or something and you really want to match it maybe towards the knot or something like that, you can choose any of the small containers. You see them in the hardware stores all the time. They're oil-based oil fillers, and you can mix and match them because sometimes you've got one color over on this side that you need to do and another color over here, so you can actually mix them to whatever level of color that you need. But I think there's a couple important points to remember with that. Is one, you want to make sure that you have at least 1 or 2 coats on your piece, because those fillers will mark raw wood. And the other thing is, if it's almost all wood's photo-oxidized, I mean they get exposed to UV light and they change color, and I'm thinking especially of cherry, where it starts out really, really light pink, but over time it goes to this beautiful, rich, like our light heart pine color, really rich red brown. So you got to decide when you really want to see those nail holes and decide what you want that ultimate nail filler to look like. And for me, I always choose something that is close to what it's going to look like over time. So initially you might have those nail holes filled like in a piece of cherry that are pretty dark, but in 2 or 3 years you're never going to see them. Whereas if you match the material now, they're going to show like little gun hole marks for the rest of the period of the piece. So I always choose like what I call the destination color to match, and that's how I'll fill. I often told people about filling, and we talk about this a lot, and that's why I advocate always using our wet dry sandpaper, because we can put some of that tung oil down first and actually sand a surface and create our own slurry for doing some pore filling and whatnot. And then if you're staining it, you've got your own natural sawdust in that piece that's going to stain with it as well. Prepping your wood, which is what we were just talking about. And I have a problem always with people wanting to use orbital sanders. And honestly, I just think that if you can avoid them, that would be great. But What do you, I mean, you do a lot more telephone work than I do. What are you hearing lately about swirl marks?
Recently I had one that used a Orbital sander, and it looked great until they finished it. And then the oil brought out all the swirl marks.
And if you're staining it, oh gosh, even worse.
Yeah, he didn't stain it, but even at that, it looked pretty bad apparently. And it was cherry, so it really showed that off. And I told him, I said, I hate to say this, but the only remedy is sending it back down and starting over, because at this point, you add oil to it, it's still going to be there. You're not gonna hide it. So
we haven't come to this problem yet because it's winter, and fortunately in the winter the air is drier for most of a lot of the east and even into the Midwest, so we don't hear this much. But spring hopefully is coming, and with it more humidity and temperature. And I'm wondering what we find that we hear from people a lot, and what kind of advice are you giving about, are there constraints, are there times when we shouldn't be oiling something, or what is your advice? Humidity.
Humidity, yes, of course. So like middle of summer, don't do it.
Mississippi, right. You have to wait for times when it's better.
There's certain days that just do not do tung oil. I mean, when you can go outside and you can feel the humidity, it's best to...
Low humidity, temperate climate around 70 degrees,
so
air moving even better.
So ideally spring and fall are the best times.
Right, depending on where you live. Oil needs oxygen to cure, and when the air is saturated, the ability for that oxygen exchange to occur is minimal. And you rarely get into trouble with your first or second coat. It's almost like it's the last coat of the project. Maybe they leave a little bit too much on, and smack, they get caught with some humidity, and then the surface flashes. And people will call and say, oh, I've got this really uneven surface, and all of it, you can just feel it, you cringe when you hear it, because you know the next thing they're going to say is some of it's really dull, like there's no finish on it at all. And other pieces or other parts on the piece look great, they're really shiny, and you're like, oh boy, this isn't good.
I hate telling people they have to sand back down.
Or strip it off or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, if you just pay attention to your temperature, your humidity, your process, then you should be fine. What is normally maybe a 24-hour turnaround time can easily become 48 and 72 in certain projects. Temperature changes, that's a great one. We have people that open windows during a project or something like that. It's 60 degrees, 65 during the day, but all of a sudden now it's 8 o'clock, the sun has gone down, the windows are open, you get a lot of condensation in the atmosphere outside, and now, like especially on floors, the lowest part in the room is always the floor. So you get a nice wet blanket of air on top of that oil, and you're probably going to run into trouble there.
And they call and they say, well, it's been 24 hours, but it hasn't been 24 hours of the correct temperature.
Right, exactly. The other thing, at this time of year, we live here in Vermont, and so we're heating our spaces, and some people have outdoor shops and garages and whatnot. When we say the temperature needs to be around 70 or whatever, we're talking about 24/7. We're not talking about while you're doing it. We're talking about that entire curing time. So make sure your shop or wherever you're finishing is acclimated to the best humidity and temperature as possible, and just check, like we say on our label, push your hands across the grain. If it just glides right across, you know your surface is ready to go.
And if there's any grab or attack on your fingertips, definitely wait.
Because we polymerize to such a degree, it really eliminates the amount of chemical dryer that we have to put in there, which is a good thing. Chemical dryers are probably the most toxic component in most finishes. So reducing your exposure is great, but the compensation is managing your environment.
Somebody asked too recently, how's the color change of my wood going to be with your tung oil? They were wondering if it's going to darken it, would it be lighten it, would it stay the same? They were wondering what the color change was going to be.
Right.
And I basically just came out and told them, I said, if you wet the wood with water or clear mineral spirits, which obviously has no color in it, that's how it's going to look with our tung oil. And people are concerned because our tung oil has like an amber color, which it does, but it's a light amber color, and you put it on so thin, it doesn't impede much color, no.
No. I mean, if you put it on like white oak or eastern white pine, it's still eastern white pine that looks brand new, that kind of thing. Not true of all finishes though. And for instance, some other tongue oils aren't just tongue oil. They have linseed oil in them and whatnot. And linseed oil is a really fine oil for accelerating the color in something, but it is not, it doesn't stay color neutral. And it's the kind of change that creates a real orangey tone in wood, where our material isn't going to do that at all. So we hear this a lot, and it's one of the reasons why we've changed our protocol for how to finish. Client calls and they have a beautiful cherry piece, and they've used a really low solid, like low luster, and they've got all these shiny dots. They've got speckling. What do we tell them?
What it is basically oil, the natural oils that are seeping out of the wood.
Right.
Correct? It's like
the tongue oil is coming right back out of the wood, and it's typically because we've created friction, and it's on a dense wood, and the wiping process heats the oil, and it heats the solvent too, so that volatilizes and it starts to move out, and there's such a low solid of oil and so much friction, it keeps perking to the surface. So you see it on open grain woods like oak a lot, and you see it on really dense woods like cherry, because it can't really stay in the wood. So one of the things that we've done is to tell people, don't wipe it. Don't wipe that first coat. Just put that first coat out and let it soak into the wood. Give it 30 or 40 minutes. If you've got some areas where you still got some oil standing there, sure, go wipe that off. But otherwise, that tends to give you a good base in there, and so it doesn't continue to occur. So John, what about our stains? People are always asking us, can we put them outside?
I typically say no, because they're inline dyes that can fade in direct sunlight. But I tell them if it's protected area, such as they have under a porch, roof, or eave, they certainly can. And then if it does fade, when they do their maintenance coats on a yearly basis or every 2 years, they can tint the tongue oil or whatever product they used of ours and bring in more color.
So if it's not a good protected area where they can use ours, what do we tell people?
We usually tell them to look at an exterior grade stain. You know, their local hardware store, sells them. One product that we recommend is a Benjamin Moore stain, just because we've done it ourselves. We know it's compatible. So what needs to happen is the wood would be stained first with the Ben Moore stain, or other fine oil-based stain, and then our products would be like a maintenance coat or a protective coat on top of the stain color.
Right, right. So we definitely want to tell them that we would advocate for using not the water-based stains, but the oil-based stains. And I usually say the semi-transparent, because it lets some of the grain come through.
Yeah.
Benjamin Moore, Cabot makes a great exterior product as well. Thanks again for coming by.
Bye-bye.